All right, ladies and gentlemen, MrSotko here. Welcome back to the channel. Got a whole bunch of good crypto news stuff for you today. Going to talk about pricing and the recent crash and all that good stuff. But the main news, of course, as usual lately, is Craig Wright. I can't seem to get away from Craig Wright on the channel, but we all know that we kind of love it. It's like that troll in the community, and without him, it'd be a little bit boring. So this time, we have an article here a little different, and it was posted all around the Reddits and such like that, and then made into an article. So there's a little bit of uncertainty with all this as to who this really belongs to, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. So Craig Wright is a liar. Early adopter proves ownership of Bitcoin address that was claimed by Craig Wright. So since last year, Craig Wright has been involved in the lawsuit against Kleiman family, who are suing him for allegedly manipulating the now deceased Dave Kleiman's inheritance. Wright and Kleiman worked together, and the Kleiman estate and Dave's brother Ira accused Wright of fraud over $11 billion worth of Bitcoins. This is due to the slew of documents and contracts submitted as evidence in the Florida lawsuit. And that sentence there is actually going to be pretty important for the next article that I have to talk about as well. So one specific contract submitted to the courts called Exhibit 11 shows a variety of Bitcoin addresses that were allegedly used in a trust held in the UK. So submitted by Craig Wright. And this is the address right here. Starts with 16, about 53,000 Bitcoin. The supposed trust would have been kept untouched until the regulatory issues were resolved, likely referring to the regulatory unknowns with Bitcoin at the time. However, after February 27th, almost immediately after the case came to light, WizSec Security published a post called Kleiman vs. Wright, the Bitcoins that never were, which debated the legitimacy of the trust's address in the first place. WizSec's research concluded that only reason the addresses were used is because at one time they all had large amounts of Bitcoin in them. And again, if you remember, it was a good couple, 2-3 months ago, I made a video, and in that I had showed an article on the Bitcoin forums of somebody asking to actually pay money for old Bitcoin addresses, whether they had Bitcoin in them or not. So somebody was buying old addresses. Somebody needed to get a bunch of old addresses. Now, you don't necessarily need to buy them. Of course, you would need to buy them to get the private keys. But in this case, we could just see that these are just public keys of confirmed, addresses. So they're very old addresses, and anybody can really do that by just looking up some old public keys. That's not particularly difficult. So some wallets were simply used for the Mt. Gox cold storage, and others were merely traders who managed to accumulate lots of coins. So there is the signature being verified, a photo of the signature being verified. So somebody else, it says, does not belong to Satoshi or Craig Wright. Craig Wright is a liar and a fraud, and they verified the signature. So the message also contained a legitimate signature of the owner, which can be verified by using public tools online. Essentially, the owner's signed message contains a hash that successfully validates against the specific address that once held more than 160,000 BTC. So there's some interesting, things coming to light here in the Craig Wright versus Kleiman case. In that, was there ever even really Bitcoin? And is the claim of the Kleiman family even valid? What is the claim of the Kleiman family? What is their evidence? Well, their evidence is essentially the documents between Kleiman and Craig Wright, which could have been falsified to begin with. Why Wright would do that, or anybody would do that, not really sure. But really, the only evidence that they have, there is no real evidence that that Craig Wright, and I don't even mean to actually defend Craig Wright here, but there really is no evidence that he had actually taken Bitcoin, or that he ever had this much Bitcoin, etc., or that Kleiman ever had it. There was just these documents floating around, and the Kleiman family are like, whoa, what's up with these documents? Maybe we should sue for this. So I'm going to go on to this next article here. It's kind of long. We'll be able to breeze through it here pretty quick, but Kleiman versus Craig Wright, the Bitcoins that never were. So I agree with this article, and I somewhat disagree with this article as well at the same time. We'll get into that in a second. So today, some news landed about a $10 billion lawsuit Craig Wright case. It's an interesting read, but unfortunately for anyone involved, its claims have little basis in reality. The lawsuit purports that Wright fraudulently acquired large number of Bitcoins owned by Dave Kleiman through forging various documents. But the very very existence of these Bitcoins in the first place is just another fantasy. So I had previously seen some of the material included as exhibits in the lawsuit, and in my opinion was that all of the documents and made specific testable claims as to owning Bitcoins were relatively easy to debunk as simple backdated forgeries. So I'm not a lawyer, but it seems somewhat fitting that Wright now finds himself sued by someone taking many of those claims at face value, as Wright's seemingly only defense would be to allow those prior claims to be proven false. So the lawsuit here, brought by Dave Kleiman's relatives, that largely Wright and Kleiman together were involved in the creation of Bitcoin and owned a large number of Bitcoins. Taking these claims at face value, at the same time, the lawsuit represents Wright as fraudulent and untrustworthy, having forged a number of documents. So ultimately, this is a case of self-serving reasoning that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. If Wright falsifies and invents facts to suit his own purposes in one part, why would he be considered a trustworthy source for the other information? Most of Wright's narrative is full of holes and provably false, and the lawsuit spends much of its time recounting Wright's numerous lies over time to connect the final dots and include the so-called 1.1 million Bitcoins in the list of falsehoods. So again, there is no proof that Craig Wright has these or that Kleiman ever had these. To be totally honest, there just isn't any. The Kleiman family is going off the documents that purportedly, allegedly, Craig Wright had fraudulently made earlier. So some people think, the Bitcoin Tulip Trust is real, and others are like, no, it's totally false. So if it's totally false, then there was no Bitcoin to begin with. So it's starting to get very strange, this case. I knew it would just get so good after a while. So throughout the many included exhibits, here are some of the many Bitcoins that are in one way or another claimed to have been part of Wright and Kleiman's alleged involvement in Bitcoin. So here's one address, 110,000, claimed to be held in escrow as part of a transfer of Bitcoin from Kleiman to Wright. However, this is just a withdrawal address associated with an entirely unrelated user of Mt. Gox and has nothing to do with either Craig Wright or Kleiman. Here's another one for 335,000. This is actually an internal Mt. Gox address descending directly from Mark Karpellis' famous proof of solvency transaction in 2011. Another one that's on the document, 250,000 Bitcoin, belongs to original Mt. Gox founder Jed McCaleb. So again, these could be in Craig Wright's possession. Who knows? But it's not looking too good that it ever was. I don't know why, but yeah. So various addresses amounting to 650,000 claimed to be held by Ewan Nguyen, whatever, and led to Craig Wright. Let's go through them one by one, see what we know about them. So some of them are unknown. Mt. Gox user, first major Mt. Gox theft. Mt. Gox user from mybitcoin.com, part of a long transaction to send minor Bitcoin amounts to BTC addresses, etc. So a lot of these are just really old addresses that belong to Mt. Gox users. And they were just sort of gathered together. And I don't know the reason for that. So if Craig Wright doesn't have these, why did he gather these addresses in the first place? To prove that he's Satoshi? I don't understand. These aren't provable addresses. We've already known this for a while, but it's starting to come more and more to light. Very questionable. Like, why does he even have these in the first place? So, Mt. Gox cold storage addresses are the same that became known as the lost and found 200,000. So in conclusion, most of these addresses actually have only one thing in common, which is a big clue to why they're in the list. They are at some point held significant amounts of Bitcoin in them. This isn't some grand conspiracy of having stolen 1 million Bitcoins. It's some guy browsing a blockchain rich list, picking out a couple of addresses at random and saying, hey, I own those for whatever reasons, while offering no evidence except for some clumsy document backdating these claims would have never gotten past an actual specialist. While the lawsuit is a nonsensical fight over unrelated funds that never belonged to either party, it offers the rest of us a valuable reminder of how easily you'll get taken advantage of if you don't follow the #1 rule of Bitcoin. Don't trust, verify. So it's kind of this in conclusion that I slightly agree with, that the lawsuit is over a nonsensical fight over unrelated funds. So let's take a look at this. Now, that could be true. That could actually be true, that conclusion. But on the other end, let's just do a devil's advocate. So if the Kleiman family came across some documents that say, hey, our brother Dave, our family member Dave, and Craig Wright mined over 1 million bitcoins, and it's in this Tulip Trust document. So let's take this to court. Okay, fair enough, right? Let's do that. Okay, so this looks like it's a pretty good contract here. Let's take this to court and let's see. So the judge is like, yeah, no, this is a legit contract, apparently. So let's get Craig Wright in this situation. Subpoena, bam. Okay, so now Craig Wright's in this situation. This is where it gets weird, right? So if Craig Wright didn't actually ever have that Bitcoin, he should just be like, no, that Bitcoin doesn't exist. That's a fake document, right? I don't have any evidence to provide you. Then that would mean that the Kleiman family would have to provide evidence that he actually owns these. Not Craig Wright would have to provide evidence that he owns these. Kleiman would have to, because they're the prosecutors. They're the ones, they're the plaintiffs. They're the ones that are saying, hey, he owns all this Bitcoin. So the judge is going to have to go, okay, prove it. And then they go, oh, I don't know, we have this document, right? And like, I don't know if that's even real. Craig Wright could be like, that's not real. That's fake, right? Why would Craig Wright prove to the court and give these addresses, and remind you, all these addresses through here, which would damn him, would be evidence against him if, again, he can't prove that he owns these addresses. I get it. But that's just damning yourself. That's like saying when you're being accused of being a murderer and being like, yeah, I'll just provide all of my knives. I got a bunch of knives, even though you didn't do the murder. You'd be like, no, I didn't do this murder, right? I didn't do this crime, right? You wouldn't just go, let me go in my kitchen and get every single knife out. Why would you do that? It's on them to prove. It's on them to prove that you did it, not for you to prove that you actually did it. That makes no sense. So this whole court case makes no sense, in that Craig Wright is trying to provide all these old addresses that would accumulate up to 1.1 million Bitcoin. Why would you do that? You're just essentially damning yourself in evidence, even though you can't prove that you actually own them or that you can actually move this Bitcoin. It makes no sense. I think it's just, it could be true that these funds never existed. Why the Bitcoin Tulip document exists in the first place, I don't know. Maybe Dave Kleiman did have a bunch and he stole them. Who knows? But he's certainly not providing the addresses that he can actually move in order to just continue the Satoshi Nakamoto deal in order to make it 1.1 million Bitcoin. So he just cherry picked a bunch of them that all equals up to about 1.1 million Bitcoin, which is said to what Satoshi had originally mined, supposedly. And just to keep up the Satoshi moniker, I guess. But then again, it's all just going to fall apart in court. It just makes none of it makes any sense. So moving on from the wacky drama for now, Bitcoin is front-running stock to flow price model at $7,300. So tweeting on Saturday, Bitcoin analyst Plan B showed how even at $7,300, Bitcoin still leads the stock to flow model, about $1,000 on the road to hitting $1 million per coin. So we're on track with this model, $1 million per coin. So let me talk about $1 million per Bitcoin real quick. $1 million per Bitcoin would actually be an incredibly convenient price for Bitcoin. Now, of course, everybody wants it to go up to $1 million so you can sell it. But what I'm actually talking about here is the actual functionality of Bitcoin. So with 8 digits, the last one being the individual Satoshi, at $1 million per Bitcoin, the individual Satoshi would be 1 penny, which would be pretty convenient, considering that you could pay something, $5.30, and you'd have to pay 530 Satoshi for that. Exactly. So that would be quite convenient to send back and forth, in terms of pennies. Now, if Bitcoin was at 100 million, that would make the Satoshi $1, which is great. The only problem with that is it would be hard to pay change with that amount. You would always have to sort of round up with Bitcoin. But that doesn't really matter so much for people-to-people transfers, peer-to-peer, whatever. But when it comes to actual retailers, there's always that odd amount. So Plan B's model posits that scarcity and value have a direct relationship, with scarcity being a measure of stock flow. According to the model, by the time the next halving, which is in May 2020, Bitcoin's stock flow should double from its current value of 25 to 50. This doubling would bring Bitcoin stock flow closer to that of commodities like gold. So Bitcoin permabulls like Max Kaiser report say Bitcoin has the potential to reach a fraction of the gold market capitalization, which is somewhere around $8 trillion. The flow model predicts that by 2020, Bitcoin should have a price of about 55,000 based on a stock flow of 50. There are about 16.82 million Bitcoin held in dormant Bitcoin addresses between accumulated Bitcoin dust and lost private keys. There are about 10.5 million Bitcoin that haven't moved in over a year. And again, as Bitcoin goes on longer and longer, no new Bitcoin will ever be mined. It's only going to be up to 21 million, not till 2140 or so. So that's another 120 years that it won't be fully mined. And another thing to think about too is that every day somebody loses a little bit of Bitcoin, or every day somebody leaves a little bit of Bitcoin dust in wallets that you can't seem to move because of the fees are too much. So moving it would just be losing it anyway, or the exchange won't allow you to move it, or this, that, or the other thing. So there's just all this dust lying around, Bitcoin dust, and all kinds of private keys being lost all the time. Especially way back in the day when nobody realized how important Bitcoin was. People would mine tens of thousands of them on a hard drive, and then they threw the hard drive out. There's a story, a guy mined 100,000 to a hard drive, he threw it out, and now he's paying people to look at a big dumpster. I think it's like in the UK or something like that, paying people to look at a dumpster. So, to find this hard drive. But, so a lot of people back in the day didn't realize, and they just got rid of their hard drives, or their hard drives crashed. They didn't back it up properly. They just didn't take the proper care because they didn't know. So we're actually missing more likely 3 or 4 million Bitcoin. We're at nearly, what are we at now? 17,700,000 Bitcoin. It's more likely that there's really only about 13 million, maybe 14 million Bitcoin in circulation, whether it is actually dormant in a wallet, that somebody has the private key to. And those other 3 or 4 million that are missing are just permanently gone. Whether the hard drive corrupted back in the day, somebody threw it out, somebody lost their private keys, their house burned down, something like that, their private keys were in there, whatever. Something, causes people to lose Bitcoin every day. So eventually there's going to be less and less and less, and the price is just going to have to go up, especially as it's halving too. Every 4 years you get the halving. It could only make 1,800 Bitcoin a day, then 900, then 450 a day. More people are going to be demanding Bitcoin very soon here than 900 a day when it halves in 2020. So it's going to be pretty big sooner or later, just by rarity in general. So CoinMarketCap here, $230 billion market cap. We have lost a good $20 or $30 billion on the market cap since the little dumpening that had occurred a couple days back. And, you can see we were at 8,300 or so, and then a wild dump. Supposedly it was a big, gigantic whale dump on Bitstamp, and really rocked the price of Bitcoin, which is not too surprising. Again, I've been saying this over and over that we're still up to $3,000 from a month or a couple of months ago, if you want to look at it that way. So even just $1,000 down, it's really not a big deal. And again, I've been saying this for a while that if you have this wild price rise, you're going to have a wild price fall at some point. It's just a matter of trying to identify where that's actually going to fall. And then it might kick right back. But we were up to 275, something like that. Ethereum, even Litecoin, was at something like $106 at its peak. Now only 87. So we've lost quite a bit. But Binance Coin way up at 27.99. And that's because they finally opened up their transfers and their withdrawals. So everybody going in, using Binance Coin to sell, selling basically Bitcoin to Binance Coin, etc. So really pumping the price of Binance Coin there. And I feel like one day Binance Coin is going to be hundreds of dollars for sure. It's a matter of time as they burn it, as crypto gets more popular and as more users come onto Binance and more users are using Binance Coin to shift back and forth. I really feel that Binance Coin, I don't have a particular year prediction, but someday Binance Coin will be hundreds of dollars for sure. So Binance Coin is really not a bad investment for sure, and it actually might be a better investment than a lot of coins, interestingly enough. But that's all I have for you guys. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you guys like the video as well. That helps me out a lot. My social media in the description below. Follow me on those if you get the opportunity. And as usual, I will see you guys next time.